Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU Audiobooks. Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Continuing Education, Certificate Programs, Certificate in Apparel Merchandising, CAPMER, BHC 05 Basics of Apparel Industry and Entrepreneurship, Block -1, Unit 2, Overview of Apparel Industry 2. 2.0, Objectives. Apparel industry holds great importance to the economy of any nation, whether developed or developing. As consumer demand for clothing is increasing worldwide, apparel manufacturing and export segments are all set to witness immense growth in the coming years. But at the same time, it is imperative that the industry adapts to new technologies and keeps a pulse on latest fashion trends in order to improve consumers' shopping experience. In the previous unit we learned about the evolution, growth and features of the apparel industry. We also got introduced to the apparel industry in India. In this unit we shall make an attempt to study about the apparel industry in more detailed manner. Our purpose will be to enable the learner to know the growth and development of apparel industry in developing countries. Describe the apparel export industry in India. Understand the structure of the Indian apparel industry. Explain the role of a merchandiser, and discuss the current perspective and competitiveness of Indian apparel exports. 2.1, Introduction. In the first unit you have learnt that the textile and apparel industry occupies a unique place in the economy of our country. The apparel industry caters to one of the most basic requirements of people, and being one of the largest industrial sectors of the country, it propels economic growth. You are also aware that this sector holds a unique position as a self-reliant industry, from the production of raw materials to the delivery of end products, with considerable value addition at every stage of processing. Its potential for generation of employment opportunities in the industrial, agricultural, organized and decentralized sectors, rural and urban areas, especially for women and the disadvantaged, is noteworthy. You have learnt about the growth of the apparel industry in our country in the recent years. It not only caters to the huge and diverse domestic market but also accounts for a large share of exports from our country. It is an important foreign exchange earner and has a significant presence in the global apparel market. Hence, in this unit you will study about the apparel industry with respect to exports and world trade. As you have read in Unit 1, India ranks at 5th position in the world in apparel exports after China, European Union, EU, Bangladesh and Vietnam. In spite of several problems, this sector has shown dynamism and achieved rapid progress during the last 2 decades. This sector has the potential to achieve tremendous growth, particularly in the global trade, by broad-basing its market and product mix to meet the challenges of trading blocks created in its major markets, i.e., USA and EU. 2.2, Apparel Industry. You have studied about the domestic apparel industry and the prominent national and international brands in various segments of the domestic market. Before studying about the apparel industry with respect to exports and trade, it would be interesting to learn the circumstances and factors that led to the establishment and growth of apparel industry in developing countries. Growth and development of apparel industry in developing countries. Apparel manufacturing is one of the many labor-intensive sectors that provide a gateway for developing countries to enter into the global market. It offers important opportunities to countries to start industrializing their economies and in course of time diversify away from commodity dependence. Over 40 years ago, the industrialized countries dominated global exports in this sector. Today, you will be surprised to know that developing countries produce half of the world's textile exports. Moreover, the economic performance of the apparel and textile industries in developing countries has had large impact on employment opportunities, especially for women, the development of small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, and spillovers into the informal sector. Textile production is more capital-intensive than apparel production, and hence developing countries account for a smaller share in textile output but account for a larger share in the labor-intensive production of garments. According to Amsden, it is interesting to know that outsourcing in the textile and apparel industry began in the late 1950s and 1960s, when Western buyers turned to Japan for the procurement of good quality fabric and textiles at low costs. Later, The desire for outsourcing from developing countries was not driven by cost considerations alone. It also followed as a response to change the structure of demand. The demand for customized products produced in smaller batches and multiple styles increased than the standardized products. Fragmented markets increased, as there was greater demand for product variety and flexibility. To reduce the risk of swings in prices and changing fashion, retailers stocked items in small quantities. The imports in textile and apparel sectors increased dramatically in the 1970s and 1980s as the producers in developing countries sought for low-skill segments considering the increased volatility in the market. Further, improvement in communication technology led to a reduction in transaction costs, and made it possible to coordinate production from different parts of the world, thereby reducing inventory costs. The role of developing countries changed both in terms of quantity as well as in their mode of participation in the global production process. They started contributing a major share of the world manufacturing output, and the share of developed countries declined. However, significant restructuring took place worldwide in the garment industry after the phasing out of the multi-fiber arrangement, MFA, on 1 January 2005. Production sites were relocated and competition became stiff due to recession. Apparel exports remained far below the potential in major countries including India due to reduced demand for apparel worldwide. Although India ranks 5th in world apparel exports, its share is too little compared to competing nations like Bangladesh and Vietnam. Dependence on narrow product base, delayed delivery, higher costs are some of the reasons, besides free trade agreements, FTAs, signed between key consuming and manufacturing countries that poses a major threat to Indian apparel exporters. Additionally, several compliance norms for which the industry is not prepared, and the fact that India is by and large linked from the global value chain has put the exports of apparel under pressure. Global apparel sourcing, shifting of textile activity to Asia. It has been said that 21st century will belong to Asia. This is getting clearer for the textile and apparel sector. It is well known that with very high labor costs in USA and Europe, entire activity from spinning to garmenting is shifting to Asian countries like China, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, etc. With the abolition of quota regime, each country is trying to grab maximum share of world trade in the textile and garment sector. Indian textile and apparel industry is facing fierce competition, particularly from China, Bangladesh, Turkey, and Sri Lanka. The high development in the global transport and communication systems has also assisted the shifting of production locations. Fast movement of commodities over continents, and instant communications led to fast transfer of any kind of data and information. This facilitated much cost reduction in sourcing commodities like garments from cheaper locations. The add-on profit advantages facilitated through these new technology systems, through cost reductions without passing on such reductions to the consumers and producers, motivated leading market players to look for cheaper products even at locations far away from the markets. Many leading international brands have been sourcing from India, such as JCPenney, The Gap, Calvin Klein, Woolworths, etc., to name a few. Check your progress. 1. Explain any two factors that led to sourcing of apparel from developing countries. 2. Which are the countries offering stiff competition to India with respect to exports? 3. Name any two international brands sourcing from India. 2.3. Apparel export industry in India. Apparel industry is the biggest segment in India's export basket. India is considered to be one of the best countries for sourcing of garments, textiles and accessories. It provides a perfect blend of fashion, designs, quality, textures and colors. Its strength lies in providing value-added garments with handwork. Manufacturers here are ready to innovate, be flexible on quantities, have a hands-on approach to quality control and keep the integrity on deadlines. Labor here is skilled and also economical, making price highly competitive, without compromising on the quality of the products. With all this in hand, Indian apparel exports will surely witness good growth in the coming times. Their pace of growth has slowed down in both volume and value terms, particularly in two consecutive fiscal years, i.e. FY 2018 and FY 2019, according to the latest IGNOU report. The slow growth can be attributed to many reasons, some of which are mentioned in Section 2.2 and others include shift of unskilled labor to better paying sectors like retail, telecom, IT etc. Rise of minimum wages per month has had a negative impact on the labor-intensive and price-sensitive apparel industry. Most of the industry has typically grown around the metros, where the cost of living is high. As the Indian apparel industry is highly fragmented, therefore it fails to achieve economies of scales. There are few exporters who have built manufacturing facilities with vertical integration. In the long term, globally competitive countries will have a significantly consolidated supply chain. The external environment may remain challenging and India may continue to experience pressure from competing nations, but Indian apparel exports will certainly be in a positive zone, although relatively slowly. The Apparel Export Promotion Council, EPC, Ministry of Textiles, Government of India, has been entrusted with the responsibility of monitoring of garment exports and promotion of exports of ready-made garments from India. It plays a pivotal role for the promotion and facilitation of garment manufacturing and their exports. Members have access to updated trade statistics and information on international fairs and assistance for participating in these fairs. It also plays a large role in identifying new markets and in leading trade delegations to various countries. It provides comprehensive information and technical guidance to workforce and also provides market intelligence. Data on updated trade statistics, international fairs, and potential markets is made available to the members. It also assists members in participating in international trade fairs and leads trade delegations to various countries. India's textiles products, including handlooms and handicrafts, are exported to more than 100 countries. The major markets to which India exports apparel are the USA, European Union, UAE and parts of Asia. The salient market of Indian apparel export is Europe, with UK, Germany and France as the leading destinations, although USA remains the single largest buyer. The other major export destinations are China, UAE, Sri Lanka, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, Bangladesh, Turkey, Vietnam, Brazil, Hong Kong, Canada, and Egypt. Exports of textiles and clothing products from India have increased steadily over the last few years, particularly after 2004 when textiles exports quota stood discontinued. As mentioned earlier, in the liberalized post-quota period, India emerged as a major sourcing destination for buyers from all over the globe. As a measure of growing interest in the Indian textiles and clothing sector, a number of reputed houses opened their sourcing/liaison office in India. These include Marks & Spencer, Hagar Clothing, Selwood, Little Label, Gould Trading Company, Castle, Alster International, Quest Apparel Incorporated, etc. Commercially buoyant retailers across the world are looking for options of increasing their sourcing from the Indian markets. Indian manufacturers are also proactively working towards enhancing their capacities to fulfill this increased demand. The government has been continually supporting the apparel and textiles exports sector through various provisions of the foreign trade policy and the other policy initiatives to enable the sector to increase market share in the global textile markets. Structure of the apparel industry. You are aware that the Indian apparel industry is extensive and heterogeneous. Indeed, the structure of the Indian apparel manufacturing industry is quite complex and it is highly fragmented. It comprises of both the organized and the unorganized sectors. The production of apparel is characterized by value addition at each stage that requires skilled and semi-skilled labor. There are various types of production units that vary greatly in size as well as composition. The chief manufacturing centers for the export market are National Capital Region, NCR, Mumbai and Chennai. The production is largely done by merchant exporters, manufacturer exporters and manufacturers. They are also supported by fabricators, who provide flexible production capacity for the manufacturers and merchant exporters. Fabricators are subcontractors mainly involved in sewing or embroidery activity. Usually, most garment manufacturers specialize in fabricating one or two forms of outfits. The manufacturers are responsible for every stage in the production of garments, from design and selling to production and deliveries to the customer. The strength of this type of organization lies in design and marketing expertise and the ability to anticipate or follow the changes in fashion very closely. Anticipate possible fluctuations in the level of demand. Finance the operation of business. The contractor's prices must not only be competitive with those of other subcontractors, but must also be low enough to make it attractive for the manufacturer to produce via the subcontractor, rather than to produce for himself. The strength of the subcontractor is in full factory management and the maintenance of very low overheads. As an individual, the subcontractor will perform nearly all the management and administrative functions within the factory and will also regularly visit the manufacturers supplying work to the unit. In addition, he must maintain continuity of production, ensure that his customers are reputed and financially secure, recognize and select the most profitable opportunities, obtain high productivity levels from the labor force, optimal usage of all the materials supplied by the manufacturer. The distribution channel for exports is also characterized by the strong presence of agents who secure and consolidate orders for the above producers. The apparel exports are traditionally executed through export houses or buying/commissioning offices of large global apparel retailers. It is important to effectively and efficiently communicate and coordinate activities of various departments within an export house/buying house and to communicate with the buyer. The merchandising department plays an important role in executing the above. Let us now briefly explore the role of merchandiser. Merchandising in the apparel industry. A merchandiser is the interface between the buyer and exporter. The merchandiser is responsible for particular lines of merchandise with specific buyers. He is responsible from order analysis to shipment. So merchandising is a very crucial department in the apparel industry. Merchandising is the department which also mediates between marketing and production departments in a company. Sometimes, the merchandising department also does costing and pricing of the apparel. The merchandiser is the person whose responsibility is to execute the orders perfectly as per the instructions of the buyer. The importance of communication with buyers cannot be overemphasized. Similarly, internal communication is also very important. You will study in detail the importance of communication skills in Block 2 of this course. The other departments follow the instructions given by the merchandising department. It is the sole responsibility of merchandising department to instruct other departments with respect to the specifications and instructions of buyers' orders. The main responsibilities of a merchandiser include internal and external communication, sampling, accessories and trims, preparing internal order sheets, preparing purchase orders, advising and assisting production, advising quality department about quality level, mediating production and quality departments, giving shipping instructions and following shipping, helping documentation department, taking responsibility for inspections and following shipment. 2.4 Competitiveness of India's apparel export sector. Competitiveness is generally measured by comparison of global market shares in particular segments of apparel. It can also be assessed on the basis of production costs in the currency of the buyer. Since labor costs constitute a large component of production cost, labor productivity becomes a crucial factor. However, as the Indian garment production is characterized by excessive presence of the informal sector, labor data remains largely incomplete. Also, due to the presence of many non-price factors such as quick response, fabric quality and processing quality etc., no single indicator can reflect competitiveness of Indian garment sector properly. A number of indicators are normally used to measure competitiveness of Indian apparel exports. According to the latest data released by World Trade Statistical Review 2019 by the World Trade Organization, WTO, the values of top 10 exporters of clothing in the world, along with their percentage share in world exports in the year 2018 is given in Table 1. Table 1, Top Exporters of Clothing, US dollars billions. Look at the screen for table content. As you can observe from Table 1, although India is at the 5th position, its share in the world exports is only 3.3%. It is facing stiff competition from countries like Bangladesh, Turkey, and Vietnam. China has surged far ahead in exports and has penetrated in almost all product categories. Indian apparel exports remain as a drop in the ocean of global garment exports despite the fact that it provides local economic growth in relatively large measure. Various reasons have been cited for the relatively poor performance of the Indian garment sector in the world market. This could be attributed to the fact that garment exports from India is largely confined to cotton garments and hence confined to only one segment of the apparel market. Government policies have at times also created distortions in the industrial sectors, which lead to failure in reaping the liberalized and globalized trade atmosphere. 2.5. Current perspective in Indian apparel exports. The latest data available from various primary and secondary sources is not much encouraging with regard to India's position in the world garment market. India is a key player in the global textiles and apparel market. However, the global market for textiles and apparel is very competitive and requires all the major suppliers to continuously improve their product basket in terms of quality and pricing. Despite high growth witnessed in areas such as Bangalore, Mumbai, New Delhi, apparel from woven fabric, and Tirupur knitwear cluster, due to certain infrastructure disadvantages, cost of inputs and transaction costs, Indian apparel industry has been losing its competitiveness to emerging smaller economies like Bangladesh, Vietnam etc. On the other hand, in the last few years, the Indian exporters have been able to create a niche for themselves in the global market. This comes from delivering products of exceptional quality, beautiful craftsmanship as well as timely deliveries. According to experts, the exporters can turn in this acceptance to an opportunity. For instance, for the last many years, Indian textiles have been well accepted in international markets for their exceptional quality, so even if these products were to be expensive by a small margin, the buyers would still flock to Indian shores, since the domestic exporters have created a very good reputation for themselves. But the current price difference, when compared with those of other countries, is very much on the higher side to entice an international buyer. This price difference comes from the high cost of basic raw materials, which normally account for 50 to 60% of a finished product cost. Other than raw material costs, high logistics and capital costs are hampering the growth of the industry. Another important factor is the cost of transportation. It is cheaper to ship material to nearby foreign countries from the nearest port than transporting the same volume within the borders of India by road. The other issue confronting the textile exporters is refund of state taxes and duties. While the central government refunds the duties and taxes it receives from the exporters, it would help the exporters if the states were also to do so. High working capital costs also add to the already lofty overheads the textile industry is incurring. The exporters are in position to deliver exceptional results if they could access dollar loans at affordable rates. All these factors, if looked into by the government of the day, could help the exporters ride out the crisis and at the same time grab competitor shares. The United States of America, USA, and European Union, EU, continue to be the most important markets for Indian apparel industry. However, these countries have been insisting upon compliance to certain social, environmental and safety standards and norms by the producing units in the exporting countries. There is an increasing use of non-tariff barriers in the form of environment-related issues, labor standards and other social compliance issues by developed countries. Though India has been opposing such moves by the advanced economies as disguised trade barriers and non-compliant to WTO agreements on global trade, it is felt that a more compliant industry will enhance the country's image and greatly add value to India's overall competitiveness in the global apparel market. Therefore, the idea of developing and implementing a common compliance code incorporating all social compliance issues has been proposed by the Ministry of Textiles to empower the textile and apparel industry with adequate compliance information on global social, environmental and safety standards and norms and to train the industry to comply with these norms. You will be reading more about compliance in Course 4 of this program. It is imperative that the country leverages its underlying advantages and builds capabilities to place itself as a complete solution provider rather than only a manufacturer. 2.6. Conclusion. This unit well explains the reasons for the growth and development of apparel industry in developing countries. It also emphasizes the role played by technology in bringing about this growth. Subsequently, it details the structure of apparel industry and explains the importance of merchandising department, which also mediates between marketing and production departments in a company. The merchandiser is the person whose responsibility is to execute the orders perfectly as per the instructions of the buyer. After reading this unit, you must have also realized the various underlying causes for the slow growth of Indian apparel exports, which certainly be in a positive zone provided it gets the required support from the industry and the government. 2.7. Let us sum up. In this unit, you have studied the growth and development of the apparel industry in developing countries like India and their emergence as global sourcing centers for apparel. The growth of the apparel industry in India began in the 1970s and 80s and has intensified in the last few decades. Apparel production is the least capital-intensive section of the textile value chain and is highly labor-intensive, requiring skilled and semi-skilled labor. Hence, along with improved communication technology, the above factors led to the outsourcing of apparel from developing countries and in turn promoted the development of the apparel industry in these countries. This led to the emergence of developing countries such as India as key players in the global apparel market. With the phasing out of multi-fiber arrangement in January 2005, and high labor cost in EU and USA, the global apparel sourcing shifted to Asia. The structure of apparel industry in India is complex and fragmented. The production is done by merchant exporters, manufacturer exporters and manufacturers. They are aided by fabricators. Merchandisers play a crucial role in effective communication with the buyers and also in efficient coordination of the various departments within the company. The export of apparel from India is supported by Apparel Export Promotion Council. India is currently the fifth largest exporter of apparel in the world. The major export markets are USA and EU. Many international brands have been sourcing from India and Indian exporters have been able to create a niche in worldwide apparel exports with value-added products. Apparel exports have grown considerably in the last few years, although they remain far below potential. Increased input costs, poor infrastructure, high interest rates, logistics and transportation costs are some of the constraints being faced by the exporters. China is far ahead in apparel exports and India is facing stiff competition from emerging smaller economies like Bangladesh, Turkey, and Vietnam. Also, the Indian apparel industry needs to follow global norms on social and environmental compliance issues stringently to compete in the global market today. 2.8. Keywords. Decentralization, the transfer of authority from the central government to subordinate or independent government organizations or the private sector. Fragmented markets, a market with no major players. The market consists of several small to medium-sized companies that compete with each other and large companies. Value chain. A value chain is a set of activities that a firm operating in a specific industry performs in order to deliver a valuable product or service for the market. Multi-fiber arrangement imposed quotas on the amount arrangement that developing countries could export in the form of yarn, fabric and clothing to developed nations. FDI, foreign direct investment. FDI is an investment in the form of controlling ownership in a business in one country by an entity based in another country. Regime, a system or ordered way of doing things. Non-tariff barriers. A non-tariff barrier is a form of restrictive trade where barriers to trade are set up and take a form other than a tariff. Non-tariff barriers include quotas, levies and other restrictions used by large and developed economies. Trade delegations, a group of government officials from a particular country that visits another country to meet similar people to sell the companies there. WTO, international organizations dealing with the rules of trade between nations. Compliance, the ways in which order is maintained. Developed nation, a country that has a well-developed economy, advanced industrial activity and infrastructure, high standards of living and low poverty rate relative to other less developed nations. Thank you for watching. We will see you in next video with next chapter.